Before we begin, I promised a very good friend of mine that I would show you this 48-inch long print that he got me as a Christmas present. I haven't decided whether I ought to be grateful or disturbed. Another old Wildman tale appeared in a disturbing article published in the March 26, 1927 issue of the Ottawa Citizen. The tale is set in the village of Kemptville, Ontario, just south of Ottawa, near a crook in the Rideau River, and far predates the sighting of Mike King. The year was 1837, a turbulent annum in Canadian history. At that time, Canada west of the Maritimes consisted of two British colonies called Lower and Upper Canada, the former comprising the lowland of the St. Lawrence River Valley in present-day Quebec, and the latter skirting the northern shores of the Great Lakes in the so-called Upper Country of present-day Ontario. Back in 1763, following the British conquest of Canada, this vast region had been united into a single province of Quebec, a British colony whose French-Canadian inhabitants were allowed to retain French civil law and the old seigneurial system which had existed under the French regime. In the aftermath of the American Revolutionary War, British loyalists from the 13 colonies fled north into British territory and were granted land north of the Great Lakes. In order to allow the original French-Canadian inhabitants of the Laurentian Valley to retain the system of governments they had grown accustomed to, and to give the British-American newcomers a government and judiciary modeled on the British system for which they had fought, the Crown divided the province of Quebec into Upper and Lower Canada, Upper Canada for the Loyalist refugees, and Lower Canada for the French Canadians. Following the War of 1812, in which the British repulsed an American attempt to annex Canada, political power in both Lower and Upper Canada was concentrated into oligarchies. In Lower Canada, the Governor-General, the representative of the King, appointed certain wealthy British merchants and French-Canadian seigneurs to the Legislative Council of Lower Canada, apparently selecting candidates whom he believed would uphold the interests of the Crown in the event of another threat to Canadian territory. This tightly knit group of councillors, called the Chateau Clique, or the Lower Canada Tories, espoused conservative British values defined by loyalty to the King and the Church of England, as well as an interest in assimilating the French-Canadian habitants of Lower Canada into British culture. These members of the Legislative Council voted on bills passed by the Legislative Assembly, the lower house of Parliament, whose members were elected by the people of Lower Canada. In this way, Crown-appointed councillors, whose primary loyalty lay with Great Britain, could veto any bills proposed by representatives of the people, most of whom were French-Canadian. This oligarchic system sparked a political backlash called the Patriot Movement, whose members, led by Louis-Joseph Papineau, espoused French-Canadian nationalism, as well as republicanism and the classical liberal philosophies which formed the backbone of the revolutions of the previous century. For years, members of this movement struggled for political reform, hoping to replace the appointed members of the Legislative Council with representatives elected by the people of Lower Canada. Meanwhile, in Upper Canada, United Empire Loyalists, who managed to accrue wealth through banking, began to purchase land and assume the same political role as that of the aristocracy in Old England. Members of this elite community, known as the Family Compact, were appointed to both the Executive and Legislative Councils of Upper Canada and had the power to veto bills proposed by elected members of the Legislative Assembly. As in Lower Canada, this oligarchy spurred a political reaction in the form of the Upper Canadian Reform Movement, a push for responsible government led by Scottish-Canadian immigrant and radical Republican William Lyon Mackenzie. In the autumn of 1837, due in large part to the economic repercussions of a banking crisis in the United States, the political strife in Lower Canada degenerated into violence. On November 23, 1837, Patriot rebels, who had congregated in a small village on the Richelieu River, repulsed a company of British regulars who had been sent to quash their movement. This skirmish, called the Battle of Saint-Denis, touched off a 2-year struggle called the Lower Canada Rebellion. Buoyed by the Patriots' success at Saint-Denis, reformers in Upper Canada decided to launch their own Upper Canada Rebellion. In December 1837, 200 rebels congregated in a stopping place on Yonge Street, north of York, Upper Canada, present-day Toronto, Ontario. After 2 days of indecision, they were approached by a 1,000-man government force composed of British regulars and Upper Canada militiamen. After a brief exchange of gunfire, the government troops shot a cannonball into the tavern, sending the rebels into a panicked retreat. Government troops then marched from York to the tiny community of Scotland, Upper Canada, which lay between that colonial capital and the westerly village of London, to engage rebel forces in another bloodless skirmish. Most of the defeated reformists fled to the United States, from which they occasionally raided British possessions throughout the year, in what is known as the Patriot War. Despite being thoroughly suppressed, the Lower and Upper Canada rebellions prompted the British Crown to make a formal inquiry into the political landscape of its North American colonies, the findings of which were published in a document called the Durham Report. Acting on the report's recommendations, the Crown unified Lower and Upper Canada into a single province of Canada, a British colony which attained responsible governance in 1849. The political momentum initiated by the rebellions would eventually lead to the creation of the Dominion of Canada in 1867. The strange story published in the Ottawa Citizen appears to be set in the midst of the Lower Canada Rebellion, when government troops were scrambling to suppress the Patriot insurgency in the Laurentian Valley. It is alleged, the article began, that a real wildman existed in the vicinity of Kemptville about the year 1837. While loyalists of Kemptville were going through the bush in that year, they came upon a man who was entirely nude, and who had a considerable growth of hair all over his body. He could not speak intelligibly. In fact, he could hardly articulate. He was more like a beast than a man. The captors brought the poor creature before Magistrate Bottomley, and a court was held in Beckett's Hotel. It was soon evident to the court that the man was an absolute imbecile. While the judge was considering what to do with the prisoner, the people in the hotel brought him food. He ate ravenously. At that period, there were no such institutions for the care of the insane as there are at present. The court and the citizens did not know what disposition to make of him. The court decided that the only course was to allow him his liberty, arguing that if he had managed to exist in a wild state for so long, he would probably continue to do so. So he was given his liberty. When let go at the hotel door, the man ran like a deer and soon disappeared into the bush. The poor man was never seen or heard of again. The villagers were curious to know what happened to him, but they were never enlightened. The next Wildman story to appear in Canadian papers is the tale of a Cree man who appeared to be afflicted with the most dreaded disease of the North Country, possession by an evil man-eating spirit called the Wendigo. This man hailed from a bygone Hudson's Bay Company post called Front Lake, which this author has tentatively identified as Big Trout Lake in northern Ontario. Before the influence of the missionary had been felt by the Indians, the article began, there was a belief prevalent among the tribes that at different times an evil spirit, or Wendigo, took possession of a human being. When this person was completely under the spell of the evil spirit, he became invulnerable, and would kill every member of the camp, and no one could resist him. Therefore, when an Indian became ill and delirious with fever, or from old age showed signs of mild insanity, he was killed on the ground of self-defense. If we do not kill him soon enough, he will kill us later on, reasoned the rest of the camp. In the winter of 1925-26, word which had been carried by mouth to mouth from far distant Front Lake, via Island Lake to Norway House, and thence by letter to Winnipeg, was received by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police that there was a Wendigo up north. Inspector Meade was dispatched to Front Lake and brought the man in. Crazed by fear of Indian black magic and witchcraft, he was out of his mind, unable to walk, and generally desperate. Under police protection, however, he soon began to improve, and by the time he was brought to Norway House, he was able to walk and run. The two pictures which were sent in by the Reverend F.G. Stevens of the Fisher River Indian Mission show the supposed Wendigo soon after he had been brought down by Inspector Meade, and the result of about 18 months' care by the proper authorities. On June 3, 1928, Vancouver, BC's Sunday Province ran with a full-page article written by Canadian historian Bruce Alistair McKelvie, an unsung pioneer of Canadian Sasquatch research, whose work on the subject predates that of the celebrated J.W. Burns. It seems likely that this forgotten article prompted Burns to piece together his own famous collection of wildman stories, which would introduce the English-speaking world to the legend of the Sasquatch. To the mountains of the interior of Vancouver Island, McKelvie began, offer shelter to a race of hairy giants. Some Indians declare that they do, and that the survivors of a once powerful tribe, gifted with powers of mesmerism, hide from the paleface and his civilization in the forests and caves of the central range of the island, and about Mount St. Helens in Oregon. McKelvie revealed that an 80-year-old adventurer and folklorist named Jason Ovid Allard, the son of a French-Canadian fur trader and a Cowichan woman, had recently attempted to collect as many native stories on the subject as possible. Allard unearthed a story of Ape Canyon, Washington, where giant hairy ape men are said to have besieged a prospector's cabin at the foot of Mount St. Helens in 1924. He also recovered the testimonies of Cowichan natives George Totsky and Henry Napoleon, including a passage from the latter's narrative, which seems to have been omitted from earlier publications. "They treated me with every courtesy while in their home," Napoleon said of the Siatiks, after having been taken to their underground cave. "During the winter," the Siatik said, "we sleep like the bear, and then when the spring comes, we make our regular trip along the mountain ranges and come out by Tacoma, Mount Tacoma. Then we go on to the Squatch, Mount St. Helens, and sometimes we go down the mountains and return around by the Olympics and back home again." Another native whom Allard interviewed was Peter J. James, a member of the Lummi tribe from Puget Sound. James recalled his mother's tales about the so-called Indians of the Night, who used to come down from the mountains to raid the coastal tribes, stealing women and children. When warriors of the Duwamish tribe killed one of the giants in retaliation, his huge kinsmen attacked the native camp at night, tearing young braves asunder with their bare hands. McKelvie briefly related the story of Mike King, whose encounter he anomalously set on a wilderness trail between Port Hardy, near the northern tip of Vancouver Island, and the island's western coast. Recall that most other versions of King's story place the timber cruiser's encounter in what is now Strathcona Provincial Park. McKelvie's tale went on to describe how Jason Allard traveled throughout southern Vancouver Island, asking native elders and seasoned white woodsmen if they had ever heard stories about the area's wild giants. Most of his interviewees, including an elderly Cowichan chief called Charlie Quinquarton, had never heard of the creature before. William Ernest Ditchburn, the Indian Agency inspector for British Columbia's southwest coast, proposed the legends might derive from ancient raids which Cowichan Lake Indians made on the tribes of Vancouver Island's west coast. And Finnish-Canadian seal hunter Captain Victor Jacobson claimed to have heard tales of a strange tribe of Indians from Nia Bay, Washington, on the other side of the Strait of Juan de Fuca, who possessed hypnotic powers. "There is a story current about Comox," McKelvie wrote, referring to a town on the eastern coast of Vancouver Island, that the Puntledge tribe, once a powerful band, but now numbering so few that they have been merged with the Comox by the Indian Department, were practically wiped out, one or two families escaping about 75 years ago, by the invasion in the night of a war party of strange unknown natives who swarmed down from the mountain heights of what is now known as the Forbidden Plateau, a few miles from Courtenay. Today, coast Indians cannot be induced to venture into this scenic wonderland, where, beneath towering peaks, luxuriant grasses and beautiful wildflowers grow beside cool lakes that swarm with trout. McKelvie appears to have drawn this story from a now infamous article written by journalist Ben Hughes and published in the April 17, 1927 issue of Vancouver BC's Sunday Province. The article extols the natural virtues of a certain tableland in the mountains of Vancouver Island, which Hughes dubbed the Forbidden Plateau on account of a supposed native legend, which he proceeded to relate. "There has long been a tradition," Hughes wrote, "that a race of Indians, ferocious and wild, of another nature altogether to the mild-mannered clam-eaters of the coast, inhabited the center of the island, from whose fastnesses they made forays to the coast, although their existence is not authenticated by any historical evidence. Indians cannot be found who would guide strangers back into the interior of the island, but whether their fear arises from a taboo placed on the region by the sorcerer of the tribe, or whether it was fear of the legendary foe, it is difficult to say." In the 1930s, newspapers revealed to the reading public that eerie red snow could sometimes be seen on the back of Mount Albert Edward, a mountain which towers over the plateau. This strange phenomenon, known as watermelon snow, is an optical illusion produced by crimson algae over which the snow sometimes falls. According to an article in the June 28, 1930 issue of the Victoria Daily Times, the red snow contributed to the native taboo of the Forbidden Plateau, which they believed was haunted by spirits of the dead. Over time, the legend which Hughes introduced evolved to incorporate both the watermelon snow of Mount Albert Edward and the hairy monsters of Vancouver Island. Folklorist Shannon Sin summarized a version of this multifaceted tale in his 2017 book, The Haunting of Vancouver Island. The Comox are about to be attacked by the Cowichan, he wrote. They sent all their women and children to hide on the plateau until the battle was over. When the fighting was finished, the warriors went to the Forbidden Plateau to retrieve their elders, wives, sons, and daughters. There was no sign of them anywhere. In one version of the story, the warriors discovered that the place where the non-combatants had taken shelter was now covered with blood-red lichen, a sure sign, they believed, that their loved ones had been taken by the demons that haunted the mountains. In a scrapbook she put together, which is housed in the Courtney District Museum, local historian Ruth Masters included a 1967 confession by mountain guide Clinton S. Wood to have invented the legend of the Forbidden Plateau. Wood first discovered the plateau in 1925 while working as a waterworks engineer for the city of Courtney. So entranced was I with the great beauty of the subalpine country, he wrote, that I made up my mind that the general public should be made aware of its great potential as a drawing card for the district, and as a great recreational district for all, especially if it could be made a bit more accessible. I was secretary of the Board of Trade, and had the idea that a bit of mystery, added to the obvious attractions, would help publicize it. I wrote a small article to the Comox Argus, and the idea was seized upon by Ben Hughes, the editor, who wrote an article to the Vancouver Daily Province using the word plateau. To this was added the word forbidden by Cecil Scott, and thus originated the name Forbidden Plateau. Wood would later capitalize on the legend he created, building the Forbidden Plateau Lodge, from which he led skiing and mountaineering tours with his wife. On April 1st, 1929, Maclean's magazine published an article by Indian agent J.W. Burns entitled Introducing BC's Hairy Giants, a collection of strange tales about British Columbia's wildmen, as told by those who say they have seen them. This piece, which introduced the word Sasquatch to the public, marks the beginning of the age of Sasquatch research, and the end of our secret Sasquatch files.